And now, Lord Starfish's epic tale of epic proportions. Kasumi's epic quest. A My Little Pony and Minecraft crossover. Chapter 5. Battle at the book's base. B close parentheses. At last we have arrived, Kasumi said dramatically. All our trials and tribulations have been leading up to this moment.
We have learned so much, and now it's time to put it all to the test,
Steve said.
So, how are we gonna go about this?
Kiyoshi said. Well, first I'm gonna storm the entire base alone, and then you two can come up after me at the end and pretend you were useful, so my dad will give you some of the credit, Kasumi said.
Right. Why don't we just storm the base together, giving us a far better chance of success?
Kiyoshi said. Because that's nowhere near as badass, Kasumi explained with flawless logic.
Trademark. Oh, I see,
Steve said, while Kiyoshi just opted to give her an, "Are you fucking kidding me?" look. Right, anyway, if I'm gonna storm the base, I have to have some epic music backing me up, Kasumi said, and pulled the band Kalafina out of her bag. She then explained the situation to them and asked for some musical backing. For some unfathomable reason, they were completely okay with being randomly pulled out of Japan into some strange fantasy land and having to put on a spontaneous performance for this obviously crazy girl. I heard that, Kasumi said, and shot a rubber band at me. And so they started performing the song Ongaku. Kasumi ran straight in through the front door and found herself in a grand entrance hall. Books were storming at her from all sides, but this was of no concern, for she pulled out a rapid rubber band machine gun and loaded it with rubber bands before Matrix lobby scening the hell out of the books. However, one of them managed to dodge the rubber bands by hiding behind a pillar and waited until Kasumi was out of ammo. Then Kasumi was out of ammo, and the book jumped back out from behind the pillar, flying straight at her, aiming to knock her out cold by hitting her really hard in the head. It didn't work, though, as Kasumi noticed it at the last second and pulled a pillow out of her bag to protect herself. Then, after the book had bounced harmlessly off the pillow, she grabbed the book and tore it to pieces with her bare hands. It was a paperback, so it wasn't that robust. She then looked around the room carefully to see which door would be most likely to lead her to where her father was. Then she realized that beyond the fact that he was in this building somewhere, she had no idea precisely where he was. So she pulled out a 3-dimensional dad radar that indicated that he was somewhere above her. So she ran through the door labeled Stairway to the Second Floor. On the second floor, she found herself in yet another giant hall, where an entire army of Cybermen were waiting for her. Ha! Is that supposed to scare me? I know full well that Cybermen are weak against gold, she boasted, and pulled out another rapid rubber band machine gun that shot rubber bands made of gold. However, unfortunately for her, these Cybermen had upgraded themselves to the point where they were immune to gold. Kasumi screamed uber loudly because she didn't know what to do. Gold was the only weakness Cybermen had that she knew of, and now they turned out to be immune to it. You will be upgraded, the Cybermen said in perfect unison, as they were closing in on their poor, helpless target. Then, Kasumi had a brilliant idea. She pulled out a Cyberman instant death laser gun from her bag and blasted the Cybermen into smithereens. But no sooner had she done that than another battalion of Cybermen entered the hall. And these had anti-Cybermen instant death laser gun shields. But by now, Kasumi had gotten into the flow of taking full advantage of her resources, so she pulled out an anti-Cyberman instant death laser gun shield gun and blasted the Cybermen's shields away before finishing them off with the first gun. She then consulted her dad radar, which told her to run into the corridor to the right. So she did. In the corridor, she saw that yet another battalion of books was charging straight towards her with swords and spears and bows and stuff. She sped up her running and turned to the side, running right past them by dashing up the walls and across the ceiling before getting right back on the ground once she had passed the books by. At the end of the corridor, she found a spiral staircase leading to the 3rd floor and an elevator that would take her straight to the throne room where her dad was being kept. Naturally, since Kasumi was led by flawless logic, trademark, she chose the stairs. There were more books at the top of the stairs,
and they sent gigantic rocks rolling down the stairs. Kasumi pulled Spider-Man's web shooters out of the bag and swung right over the gigantic rocks. Then, when the books decided to use magic to blow the staircase up outright, Kasumi pulled out a hoverboard and flew right back up to the top of the now blow-up stairs before using said hoverboard to beat the crap out of the books just for the heck of it. Meanwhile, on the outside, Kiyoshi and Steve were standing around being bored. Well, mostly. I mean, the music was cool, but Kiyoshi, at least, was getting kinda grumpy about being left out of the action entirely. Of course, Steve perfectly accepted it because he was Steve. Then they looked up and saw Kasumi coming out through a door to a balcony on the 3rd floor. "So how's it going?" Kiyoshi called to her.
It's going great. Just a few more floors to go,
Kasumi responded. And then a swarm of dragons and fairies and ghosts and birds and nuclears came flying out from the windows of the 5th floor and headed straight for Kasumi. "Need any help?" Kiyoshi called.
Nah, I'm good,
Kasumi said. Kiyoshi just rolled his eyes at her nonchalance and decided to join the fight anyway. He fired a bunch of arrows at the walls of the castle in rapid succession, creating a stairway made of arrows for him and Steve to climb up to the 3rd floor with. "Let's go," he said. "But Kiyoshi, Kasumi told us to stay put," Steve said. Kiyoshi gave him his trademark, "Are you fucking kidding me?" look. Steve then reconsidered his stance and came along anyway. So they reached the 3rd floor and Kiyoshi skillfully dodged Kasumi's attempt at punching him for not doing as she said. And then he said, "Alright, I'll handle the 3,000 on the right. Steve, handle the 3,000 in the middle. And Kasumi, you'll take out the 3,000 on the left."
Are you kidding me? I could easily take out at least 5,000 of them on my own, Kasumi reasoned with flawless logic.
Trademark. "Okay, if you say so," Kiyoshi said. Kasumi then took out an "Erase 5,000 enemies from existence-inator" from her bag and instantly erased 5,000 of their enemies from existence. "You know, your bag is slightly overpowered," Kiyoshi said.
I have no idea what you're talking about,
Kasumi said as she pulled out an extremely specific nuclear blaster, which would envelop its target in a nuclear explosion but leave everything other than the target completely unharmed. Unfortunately, one of the fairies swiped the blaster out of her hands and used it to kill Steve with. Thankfully, as always, he just respawned back in his bed, and earlier, while Kasumi was storming the lower floors, Kiyoshi had suggested that he craft a bed right next to the book's castle. So Steve simply respawned there and made it back to the battlefield in like 2 seconds. Also, the extremely specific nuclear blaster only had 1 shot, so the fairy couldn't use it again. Steve promptly murdered the fairy with his diamond sword. Since Kasumi had already killed her allotted 5,000 enemies, she had decided to sit out the rest of the battle. And so while Kiyoshi and Steve were fighting for their lives to defeat the remaining 4,000, she was sitting in a corner reading a My Little Pony comic. Unfortunately, her 5,000 enemies did not include the 500 nuclears that were headed for them, and they couldn't really attack those. So Kiyoshi and Steve were a bit nervous, really. "Kasumi, could you do something about those nuclears?" Kiyoshi said.
Huh? But I already killed over half the enemies we were fighting. I thought you wanted some time in the spotlight,
Kasumi whined like a girl whose friends were making unreasonable and contradictory requests. "Well, we can't very well kill nuclears, now can we?" Kiyoshi said.
Oh, okay, fine then,
Kasumi said and pulled out an anti-nuclear beam blaster by Cool Industries and anti-nucleared the nuclears to get rid of them. Then she got back to reading her comic and laughing at the awkwardness of Team Cadence in shining armor. And so the battle continued for a while, with Kiyoshi and Steve fighting off all the enemies without ever getting hurt themselves. And then all the enemies were dead. In the meantime, Kasumi had read 3 more comics.
Alright, now it's time to get this done,
she said, and pulled a jetpack out of her bag and flew up to the 7th floor, which was where her dad was being kept. "But then why didn't you do that in the first place?" "You know what? Never mind. It's probably some stupid, flawless logic, trademark, reason anyway," Kiyoshi said. Kasumi crashed in through the window and found herself in the throne room. The leader of the books was sitting on the throne, and on the wall to the left he had Kasumi's father strapped up to some evil machine doing evil things. "I see you finally made it here," the book said.
That's right. Now I'm going to free my father, defeat you, and end this whole thing,
Kasumi declared.